Hey you, this thing. Dude, like so many people are pissed about this thing. Out of the 10 years that the Game Awards have been a thing as of 2024, this lineup may have been the single most controversial year they've had. Unfortunately for them, it's also taking place after I became a YouTuber, and now I'm a problem. So here's the deal. I'm not going to make a redundant video explaining why the fact that a remake and a DLC being nominated for Game of the Year is so controversial. Heaven knows that plenty of others already have. What we're going to do is go through each game one by one and try to mathematically determine which nominee deserved to be Game of the Year 2024. And without further ado, I am LolofyX, and it's time to press start. Now, regardless of the controversies, I don't make the rules, we have our hand, and it's time to play. I am going to try to quantifiably determine who should win Game of the Year, and here's the method to my madness. First, I am going to aggregate the critic review scores from every major outlet that I can find that reviewed each of the games, including other aggregation sites like Metacritic. Then I'm going to scale every single score to an out of 10 system and average all of them together. Second, I'm going to do the same thing, but for player reviews, user reviews, such as through Google, Steam, the Xbox Store, PlayStation Store, OpenCritic, so on and so forth. Third, I will be scoring the games against the same criteria list as my Is It Actually Good review series, provided that I have played the game in question. When we wrap everything up, I will add my objective score for each game to being one of the critics, and add my subjective score for each game as one of the player scores before averaging everything together. That way my rating, and obviously my bias, isn't going to hold an unfair amount of sway over the final result by being a fully separate number. I'm just going to be one of the many that gets averaged together. Finally, we get to the bonuses. The scores for critical acclaim, even when you add the player score and the critic scores together, are going to come down to decimal points at the end. It's going to be a tight race. The fourth way that games are going to earn points is against their exclusivity. How pro-consumer are they? A Game of the Year kinda has to be all things to all gamers, and it's pretty hard for everyone to have the ability to have played your game when you're only available for that one Mac that looked like a trash can that one year. Conveniently, no two games on the list have been released for the exact same number of platforms, so this will be a competitive score that is ranked from 1 to 6. Each nominee will earn an additional 0.1 points equal to their rank, so the most exclusive, hardest to play game will only earn 0.1 additional points, but the most available, least exclusive game will earn 0.6, and so on. Fifth and finally, one of the hidden metrics in my actual reviews, value for money, is going to come into play here. If a game is Game of the Year material, you better feel as though you got your money's worth for it. If two games give you an equally excellent experience for the same price, but one of the games gives you more content for that price, then the one with more content is a strict upgrade over the one that gives you less. For the sake of simplicity, let's just say that if it's already been nominated for Game of the Year, all of these games that have been nominated will provide you an equally great gameplay experience. To rank each game, I'm going to take the initial retail price of each game and pair that off against my own playtime, if I have any, as well as the different categorical times each game has on howlongtobeat.com, and then average them. Each game's value for money score will be a competitive one, just like the exclusivity, and on the same scale. This system gives priority to the combined player and critical reception, with games also receiving bonuses as rewards for being accessible to everyone and more worth the price of admission than their direct competition. At the end of it all, we will add everything together and compare each game to determine who should really win Game of the Year 2024. A game that is held in the highest regard by critics and players alike is available to all and gave everyone not only a worthy return on their investment, but a return greater than that of their competition. Let's kick everything off with Sony's new darling, Astro Bot. Astro Bot. Mascot platformer / collectathon by Team Asobi. Astro Bot is a sequel to essentially the PS5's inbuilt tech demo for the DualSense controllers, Astro's Playroom. It is a very clean little platformer that, quite frankly, has absolutely no business being as good as it is. The whole game serves as a love letter to all of PlayStation's greatest hits, with everything from God of War to Ratchet & Clank, from Uncharted to The Last of Us, all finding representation. That is, of course, barring Final Fantasy, being that Square Enix notoriously doesn't like having any characters play in any sandbox that's not theirs. While it didn't come from a well-established franchise, it is a well-done, if possibly overly simple platformer that is poised to become Sony's new answer to Mario. In terms of my review, I have 100%ed Astro Bot, and I think it is an incredibly good game. It uses everything that the PS5's unique technology brings to the table, and just as importantly, I really don't have anything critically to complain about other than a lack of replayability. Once you've beaten every world, gotten every secret, collected every bot, there really isn't anything left for you to do. That said, the journey to get there is so consistently fun and wholesome that I genuinely told the friend I was playing it with that it's the type of game I would love to have around when I have kids because I want them to grow up with it. That said, Astro Bot has reviewed monstrously well with both critics and players alike. Unfortunately for Astro Bot, though, it is a strict exclusive to the PS5, with no official intent to spread it to any other platforms as of the end of 2024. And for that, it will only gain an additional 0.1 for exclusivity. With regards to your value, Astro Bot's release cost was $60, and it is the single shortest game among all of the nominees by a massive margin. My 100% playthrough took around 18 hours and 45 minutes, which is actually on the longer side, with the average being closer to 17 hours, and a normal playthrough clocking in at only 11 hours, which is fairly normal, but in this competition, it's going to hurt it a bit. While its average normal playthrough length is only the second shortest on the list, it has by far the lowest completionist time and no real replayability aspects to extend that playtime. That means that once again, Astro Bot will only earn an extra 0.1 in value for money when compared to the competition on this list. Balatro, Deck Building Strategy Roguelike by Local Thunk. Balatro stands alone on this list as being the poster child of one thing in particular, being every single indie developer's wet dream. It is an amazing example of how a single person's passion project could blow up to entirely unexpected proportions and take them from being a random guy doing programming in his mother's basement on a laptop to being Elon Musk. Also, probably with the same laptop, you're not getting rid of at this point, that thing's your baby. It is a strategic deck building game based around poker where, and I'm going to dramatically oversimplify here, you will collect cards that allow you to stack the deck in your favor and gain combos that you want, while also playing off of the 150 different Joker cards that act as modifiers and multipliers to get the highest score possible. I have not played Balatro, so my scores will not be impacting the critic or player review scores. It is, however, a game that I think I should never play, because I'm a Yu-Gi-Oh guy, and not a normal one. I like deck building. I like deck building a lot. I've made close to 20 decks, and all of them are balanced against each other, ignorant of any ban list, and on rules that I made myself. And on top of all of that, I've played Magic, Modern, and Commander, I've played One Piece, and my favorite part of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is Queen's Blood, which I got kinda schnutty at. If I buy Balatro, I will never come back. Balatro has the highest player review average of any nominee, and on the topic of being a game for the people, it also is the most pro-consumer game of all of the nominees, being available on all current and last-gen consoles, including the Switch, as well as PC, Mac, Android, and iOS. It earns a bonus of 0.6 for the final rank. Balatro's release also costs only $15 on all major platforms and $10 for Android and iOS. For that, you'll be getting 6 hours per regular run and over 180 hours on average for a completionist run. For being by far the cheapest game on the list, with also by far the highest average playtime, it has the highest value for money by an obscene margin. Balatro will also gain an additional 0.6 for the final ranking. Black Myth Wukong, Eastern Fantasy Souls-like or Sekiro-like by Game Science. Black Myth Wukong stands as possibly the biggest breakout hit of 2024, and out of an underdog story no less. Game Science had made other games before Wukong, but they were much smaller in scope and scale. At the start of development, the team at Game Science was only 14 people strong, but that exploded tenfold to 140 people as a result of just the game's first trailer coming out. From there, the brutally cinematic Souls-like take on China's most famous folktale, Journey to the West, went from an anticipated release to becoming the second most played game in Steam's history, even outperforming Palworld, another extremely popular breakout hit of the same year, which itself also shattered records. Despite its popularity though, Black Myth Wukong's rough edges can be found from time to time, and the critical reviews will reflect that. For my review, I beat Black Myth Wukong with around 80% completion, and I have some reasonably strong opinions. It was one of the games that had a ton of potential that just released poorly, at least it did on PC. However, since PC is where it got the vast majority of its sales, that's a significant problem. It took far too long for patches to roll in that fixed the performance issues, which rendered the game essentially unplayable after the mid-game. That said, it is an incredibly well done, creative, and I dare say epic Souls-like when it works. I've already made a separate essay on how Black Myth Wukong has some of the best game progression of any game that I have ever played, and I still stand by that. It's a diamond in the rough, but it is certainly a diamond nonetheless. While it does have the lowest critic score of any nominee, its average player review score is unassailably high, having by an absurd margin the highest number of public player and user reviews out of any nomination on this list. Black Myth Wukong is, unfortunately though, the third most limited game in terms of exclusivity, being only available on PS5 and PC, but with plans to bring it to Xbox Series consoles at a later date, so it gains 0.3 to its final rank for exclusivity. Black Myth Wukong is also going to cost you $60. However, for that $60, you're going to be getting around a 36-hour normal playthrough, which can rise to 66 hours for a completionist run, and my playthrough, where I got almost everything that I could in a single playthrough and got the true secret ending, took me 61 hours. Thanks to that, it will also sit in the middle of the pack for value and earn 0.3. Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree, Dark Fantasy Soulsborne by From Software. Shadow of the Erdtree is the grand central station of controversy on this list, not only for its placement, but also for its content. Elden Ring's expansion serves as the single most difficult thing to ever be made by the creators of Dark Souls, so much so that it could very easily be considered the Dark Souls of Dark Souls. Also, 100% anecdotally, while I did not beat Malenia before she got nerfed, I did beat Promised Consort Radon before he got nerfed, so
Holy crap, maybe I can't just dodge everything. Yes!
In terms of being a Game of the Year nominee, Shadow of the Erdtree has a bit of an unfair advantage over the competition, seeing as it is effectively just Elden Ring, but arguably better. Elden Ring already won Game of the Year in 2022, and now you've just submitted a better version of the game that already won the award against 5 fresh contenders, and the only thing really different is that it's a little shorter than the base game. In terms of my review, I have 100% completed Elden Ring, and I did my level best across 2 different playthroughs to find and unlock every spell, incantation, armor, weapon, and skill that Shadow of the Erdtree had to offer. I've also played every other Soulsborne title other than Demon's Souls, so I'd like to believe that I speak with the tiniest amount of authority when I say that it is arguably the best Soulsborne genre game to have ever been made to date. I have already reviewed Elden Ring, so I'm going to include my review in the description and in the card above. We're not going to linger on Elden Ring any longer than we have to for this list. Naturally, Shadow of the Erdtree is also playable on all platforms that Elden Ring is, meaning that you can find it for current and last-gen PlayStation and Xbox as well as on PC. That is the second best out of any nominee, and it will earn a bonus of 0.5 to its final rank. The value for money of Shadow of the Erdtree is complicated. In a vacuum, it's $40. However, that's extremely disingenuous, because in reality, you would either need to have purchased Elden Ring, the base game, for $60 as well, or you will have to have purchased the $80 Shadow of the Erdtree edition of the game, which combines Elden Ring and Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree into a single purchase. Meaning that in order to play Shadow of the Erdtree, you will have been required to spend a minimum of either $80 to $100 or more on the game. The thing is, we're not judging Elden Ring, the base game, in this assessment, as Shadow of the Erdtree is specifically being treated as a separate entity from the base game for the sake of the Game Awards. Metacritic has the exact same distinction. They're separate on there too. The base game already won Game of the Year. We are not listing the base game for Game of the Year again. It's just the DLC. While in a vacuum, that DLC expansion will cost you $40, the reality is that you as a consumer are going to have to spend bare minimum double that amount in order to play it in any official form, making it the most expensive nominee on this list. For the sake of argument, we're just going to say that we go with the lower number and say that you bought the Shadow of the Erdtree edition of the game with the expansion baked in rather than buying the two separately or getting any sort of deluxe editions. That still means that Shadow of the Erdtree is the most expensive nominee with a cost of $80, and for that $80, my playthrough of the expansion we're talking about was 45 hours. A typical critical path playthrough looks closer to 25, and a completion run may run you up to around 51. If the game were playable as a standalone entity for $40, things would be different, but the reality is what it is, and Shadow of the Erdtree has the second lowest value for money on its own, and will only gain 0.2 to its final rank as a result. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, open world JRPG by Square Enix. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the second game in a trilogy of Final Fantasy VII remakes, although calling Rebirth and even its predecessor, Final Fantasy VII Remake, quote-unquote remakes, is pretty heavily misleading. Truth be told, these games are remixes, reimaginings of the original game, not even remotely close to one-to-one remakes of the 1997 turn-based RPG. The story is more fleshed out with additional content that is used to flesh out both the different factions, the world, and the characters involved in it, and the overall gameplay loop is almost entirely different. Rebirth retains the gameplay that was innovated on by Remake, which seamlessly blends turn-based RPG combat elements with real-time action through the tactical mode, but also expands from being a linear experience to an open-world one that fleshes out the various settings of the Final Fantasy VII universe. In terms of my review, I have beaten Final Fantasy VII Rebirth at around 70% completion, and it was actually the third game I reviewed in 2024. Personally, I found the complexity of the game to be very overwhelming at first, but that complexity is also what lends a great deal of depth to the builds and strategy of the game as it goes on. Rebirth is also, in my opinion, one of the prettiest games I have ever seen, with inarguably the highest level of detail that I've ever seen been put into a character model. If you like party-oriented JRPGs, the world, lore, and characters of Final Fantasy VII, or just really, really pretty looking media in general, I highly recommend you give it a shot. Rebirth is also the second most exclusive game on the list, just ahead of Astro Bot. While it was exclusively released on the PS5, it will be coming to PC later down the line, and for that, it will get a bonus of 0.2 to the final rank. However, where it makes up for that is its value for money, which is the second highest average among all nominees. Rebirth is $70, which is a bit pricier than the previous entries aside from Shadow of the Erdtree. But for that, a normal run is going to get you 47 hours, a completionist run will get you around 166 average, and my run was in the middle at about 70 hours. For that, it will gain an extra 0.5 for its final rank. Metaphor ReFantazio, turn-based JRPG by Atlas, Studio Zero. Metaphor ReFantazio is the, as of yet, latest turn-based JRPG from the makers of Persona and Shin Megami Tensei. And even if you know nothing about this game, you can tell that it's an Atlas title based on looks alone. Maintaining the iconic visual design Atlas has become known for, it is easily the most visually stylish of any game on this list, but the soundtrack pulls the game in a different direction and feel from the Persona series, lending itself much more to an epic fantasy setting. ReFantazio also holds a very particular place of pedigree among the Atlas JRPG family, being their single fastest selling game to date, selling over 1 million copies on the first day of its release. Metaphor ReFantazio is the only other game on this list that I have not played, and as such, I have had no effect on the following scores. On top of the already high average scores from both players and critics, Metaphor's exclusivity is also pretty decent. You can find it on both current and last-gen PlayStation consoles, current generation Xbox, and on PC, giving it the third best availability of any nominee and earning it an extra 0.4 for the final rankings. But that's not all, because despite sharing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's high price tag of $70, it is also the third best value for money of any game on the list, falling just behind Rebirth. Atlas JRPGs are famously, or infamously, very long, with monstrous amounts of content for even a basic playthrough. For that $70, you're going to be getting around a 65-hour critical path playthrough, 82 for an average of mixed playstyles, and 102 hours for a completionist run, earning Metaphor ReFantazio another 0.4 bonus for the final rankings. And with all 6 nominees covered, let's compare and contrast each game's critical and player scores. Now then, let's combine the player and critic scores to decide which game is the most critically acclaimed overall by both players and critics alike. In order of least to most critically acclaimed, we have Black Myth: Wukong in last place with 17.7 points. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth maintains 5th with 17.8. Shadow of the Erdtree with 18.4 takes 4th. Metaphor ReFantazio takes 3rd place with 18.7. And Balatro takes the silver medal with 18.8, while Astro Bot surprisingly takes the gold as the most universally critically acclaimed game of 2024 with 19.1 points. And the crazy thing is, you guys were right! Among all of the polls that I had you guys do for who was going to win Game of the Year, The final round had you guys vote Astro Bot by a pretty wide majority. Who knew my audience had such good taste? I'm kind of proud of you guys. But the pride will have to wait, because now it is time for the real finale, when we add all the bonuses to the game to determine what is the highest, most critically acclaimed game that is available for all and gives you the most of your money's worth. What do our final ranks look like? Which game should win Game of the Year 2024? In a massive upset, the little indie game that could, Balatro takes the first place spot! And you know what? None of that matters. It doesn't, none of it matters. Because the Game Awards doesn't actually care about us gamers. They don't. They're the gaming Oscars, gaming Emmys. It's like 90% industry and outlet committee vote and only 10% what we vote on. Which means that realistically, Balatro has next to no shot at winning and never did. Wukong, same deal, no shot. Final Fantasy probably has no shot just because it didn't review super well and sold worse. If we're going off of just critical reception, you know, just the industry and outlet people, most of the list isn't even in the conversation anymore. At that point, it just comes down to Astro Bot and Shadow of the Erdtree, which, considering that one of them technically has already won Game of the Year, I know who I'd rather vote for now. Thank you all so much for watching, and to all of the new recent subscribers, thank you even more. What game did you guys want to see get recognized as the one to represent 2024? As much as Elden Ring is one of my favorite games of all time, my vote was always Black Myth Wukong. A huge shout out to my S-tier patron, Daniel Russell, for the support. And as always, guys, I will see you, yes you, next time.